I think one thing that you guys need to be aware of is as you're getting out there and you're sitting down either face to face, or if you're on the phone and the spouse happens to be there, please understand and don't forget that you don't want to sell to just one person. Okay, just because there's a more, and this is typically the dynamics at play here, there's typically a spouse that's more verbal and kind of leads the charge more than the other. And the perception can be, hey, that person's the decision maker. That's the person with the most pull. But don't ever fall victim to that folly thought. And I'll give you an example. One of the worst things you can do, especially men or women too, really, if as an agent, is speak to one person as if they're the only decision makers, the only person that has an impact. I've told this story before, but this is always a good example. I remember when I was getting my braces when I was in 6th or 7th grade, and we sat down with Dr. Pop, and my mom and dad divorced. He already paid the check, I guess, or was going to pay it. And Dr. Pop spent the whole time talking to me, some 12-year-old punk kid, and spent very little time talking to my mom. And I remember walking out of that, and I didn't think twice of it. I was just 12 or 13 at the time. But my mom was complaining to me about how this rude doctor didn't even acknowledge her or answer her questions, or even didn't even pay attention to her the whole time. He just looked at me and talked to me as if she was kind of just an accessory to the crime, And it always kind of reminded me, when we're out in the field, we don't ever want our clients to feel that way. Okay. And the dynamics of a spouse and spouse situation, you don't really know who the decision maker is or the influencer is. So you always want to make sure that as you go through the presentation, don't just ask one person what their thoughts, concerns were when they requested the information. Ask both of them. Okay. Ask them both what their opinions are. So Mr. Jones, I see that you filled this card out and sent it back. Is that right? Yes, it is. So my question to you, sir, at the beginning is, what were your thoughts, concerns when you sent this back? Blah, 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 blah. And what about you, Mrs. Jones? What were your thoughts, concerns that kind of, obviously you're involved in thinking through this. What were you thinking when you decided to do this too? Is equally give both a playing field to allow them to express their feelings and opinions. Okay. If you don't, you can literally go through a whole presentation and not know what one significant person thoughts and concerns are, and really not have that ability to leverage their influence, if you will, because they may be quiet the whole time and say, hey, we need to think about it and give this some thought. And then you leave and they're pissed about something that you didn't acknowledge them or whatever, right? So the point is, ladies and gentlemen, make sure that when you're sitting down or on the phone, you're sitting down with the client for sure, make sure you're talking to both of them, make sure you're making eye contact with both. Don't play favorites. Or I know it's probably not intentional, but be intentional about talking to both of them. And you want to have some interplay between both anyway, right? You want them to correspond and think and talk through right now while they're in front of you, because if you don't get that interplay going on, they may be more inclined to just say, well, think about it and talk about it and get back to you, or we need to pray about it or something, right? So don't forget the importance of engaging both simultaneously and as equally as possible. So here's the thing about Telesales that's unique from face-to-face. You only have one shot, and the shot you may have may not have all the odds lined up in your favor. I do not believe that you should schedule a callback if the spouse isn't there present. You should go forth and run the whole presentation. Now, in the process of talking, you should, in the rapport building stage, get an idea. Are they married? Are they separate? Are they single, widowed, whatever, right? And if they say that they're married and they're looking for coverage on themselves and their spouse, and that's the time to invite the other person on if they're there. Hey, why don't you put this on speakerphone so Bob can hear and I can answer questions, because I know he's going to have some, and this will save us some time. So go ahead and put it on speakerphone and let me know when you're ready. So notice how I told them, hey, go ahead and put this on speakerphone and let me know when you're ready. So I just assume they're going to do it. I don't ask for permission. Okay. So you want to set that up earlier on in the sales call as much as you can when the spouse is there. But if they're not there, then you got to keep going forward. And yeah, it's going to be difficult because the spouse isn't there, and they may need to say they need to talk to their spouse. But the problem with telesales is you're never going to get another shot. It's a lot harder to get them back on the phone. You can't just show up at the door like you can with face-to-face and have some leverage in your favor. So make sure that you do what you can to get them on the phone. If you can't, you got to keep going. Back to face-to-face to make sure that you guys understand too, never do a one-legger. This is the sales presentation where one spouse is not there. and you're only pitching to another spouse. If you're face-to-face, as soon as you recognize that, it is a callback scenario. Then you just say, hey, look, Mr. Jones, let's do this. I'm married. Everybody I talk to that's married agrees with what I'm about to say. They want their spouse to be there to think through and make sure that this is a good decision for them. Plus, they may be interested in coverage too. So let's do this. I'm going to come back later tonight. Will your spouse and you be here together, say at 5 o'clock or to 7 work better? So I go right into rebooking an appointment just like I would over the phone. Do not go any further in the presentation. Okay. As a new agent, don't try to pitch the person alone. Get them both together. Your odds of success go through the roof. Now, why is that the case? Well, number one, when you pitch one person and leave, your person you sold, let's say, or convinced to buy and is going to now talk to the husband about it, let's say, will only retain about 10% of the information you gave them. They're going to remember the feeling they had about you being a good person, that kind of thing, and maybe some facts about the insurance. The problem is the other person has nothing to gauge whether you're a trustworthy person or not. So they assume the worst. That's just a defensive maneuver that all men and women have to certain degrees, is that they're just going to assume, oh, this sounds like a scam. I'm not sure about this, so I'm not comfortable moving forward. You just call back and cancel it. So my advice is don't even fool with it if you're face-to-face. Just go ahead and run the appointment. Run the appointment later when both of them are there. And that way you can make a connection with both of them, because again, it's not the products that sell the insurance. It's not the branding, DeFord Insurance Group. It's you. It's the agent. And that agent is the brand. That is the power behind moving people from inaction to action. And when there is a scenario where there's two heads that are thinking together, like in a marriage situation, you need to be in front of both of them to get their approval and agreement simultaneously. Otherwise, you're running the risk of on a high odds scenario, even if you do everything right, lose the person. Are there exceptions to rules? Yes, there's always exceptions to rules. Please understand that we run a business by rules, not exceptions. Will you run into some spouse that will buy without the other? Sure. I can remember like twice where that happened out of 3,000 presentations, of course. But what I don't remember, but I know happened, is probably the 50 to 100 times I didn't listen to my own advice that I gave you, that I pitched the spouse anyway, and then I ended up not getting a deal, or it never manifested, right? So I pitch the presentation simultaneously, right? So what were your thoughts what are you doing right now for your coverage, Mr. Jones? Nothing. What about you, Mr. Jones? Nothing. Oh, wow. So God forbid if you died, Mrs. Jones, what would happen? What about you, Mr. Jones? So I'm going through the presentation with them together. I'm not doing, and this is probably obvious, but I just want to be clear on this. I'm not doing one full pitch and then another full pitch afterwards. I'm doing them both at the same time. Okay. When I get to the presentation, or I get to the application, excuse me, I'm probably going to do one at a time at that point. So it depends on the dynamics and how the application is completed. You know, if you're going to do a phone interview and there's an EAP process, you got to do the EAP process, then the phone interview. And then when you get done with the first, then you move to the second and then do that process again. So that's kind of how it looks. It is going to take a lot longer. Husband, wife, spouse, and spouse scenarios take a lot longer. It's not going to be an hour, probably. It's probably a little longer.